Hello everyone! Zazubaar here. And I'm fucking posting another video less than a week after I posted the last one. Booyah, motherfuckers! 2 in a row. Fucking 2 in a row. Yeah, no, that's not very impressive. It has been very slow lately over here at Zazubaar Film Productions, and I apologize greatly for that. It's not pissing anyone off as much as it is me. I love posting YouTube videos, I love posting reviews and discussions and trailers and all that crap. And I love it, and it sucks that it's been so slow lately and I haven't had a lot of time to sit down and do it. I've said why in other videos before, so I won't bore you with the details, but of course I got college going on, I got work going on, I got some stuff behind the scenes going on, I'm going to reveal a little bit. I got some shit going on. But why are we here today? Posting a video less than a week after the last one. Well, it's a video that I promised my Twitter followers and my Facebook followers, friends, whatever you want to call it, people I know on Facebook, that people seem to dig, to be attracted to. And I think I'm going to post it now because why the fuck not? So today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be taking a look at a comic book I got about a week and a half ago and read within 2 days. We are going to be taking a look at the very, I guess famous is the right word. I wouldn't want to say infamous because that might be giving a negative connotation. We're going to be taking a look at Frank Miller's Robocop, which is a graphic novel produced by Doom Studios, and is a little bit of a weird kind of thing in the comic book world because, yes, it's Frank Miller's take on Robocop and on the universe, but that implies that it's like the beginning of a story. It's not. What this book I'm holding is it is a graphic interpretation, a comic book interpretation of Frank Miller's original Robocop 2 script. Now, for those of you who don't know, I won't bore you with the history, even though it's kind of interesting history, but it doesn't really impact this review at all, except in comparing it to Robocop 2, which I will do, but even then it doesn't really impact it that much. What happened was, the original Robocop movie is very much so inspired by comic books of the mid-'80s, and one of the biggest and most important of the influences was Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns. If you watch the original Robocop again, and then you read Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, the similarities are striking. Now, mainly what strikes the similarity is in, well, number one, the dark and kind of fucked up tone of the whole thing. This overly violent, dark, depressing atmosphere of just a downtrodden, fucked up, almost apocalyptic American city, subbing in Detroit for Gotham, of course. But really the big thing is the social commentary. Robocop has a lot of very poignant and on-the-nose social commentary of the time, mainly regarding the media and corporations relating to that media, but also corruption in those corporations and corruption involving actual street crime and violence. And that was definitely something that The Dark Knight Returns became very popular for. And Robocop wasn't stealing it. It was more saying, we want to do a similar thing, just on a different topic. So the influences are definitely clear. And it's a very good idea, since they did borrow so much from the Dark Knight Returns and from Frank Miller's take on Batman, that when Robocop came out and was really popular, they were like, we have some clout now. Let's go over to this guy who we took a lot of influence from. We know he's a screenwriter as well. So fuck it, let's ask him, Frank, can you write us a Robocop script? And he agreed, and Robocop 2 by Frank Miller was given to Orion Pictures. And they were like, Frank, we can't fucking film this. Robocop 2, as written by Frank Miller, was for years called unfilmable. It was so insane, so filled with incredibly insane ideas that Orion deemed it, we cannot film this, especially with our budget. The Robocop new movies, while they look great for the time, they weren't high-budget, epic extravaganzas. They were more or less really good action films that, you know, they used their budget however they could. They weren't really these giant special effects extravaganzas. In fact, in the first film, there are really only two things that involve special effects. Robocop and Ed 209, and then the explosions they cause. And of course the gore. But in terms of like actual, stuff like robotics that's hard to do with practical stuff that you can't like. With robotics, of course, it's hard to make it look like it's actually robotic. And with Robocop, it's a little easier because it's just basically a guy in a suit. But with Ed 209, it was obviously stop motion. So one of the things that Frank Miller wanted to do in his take on Robocop was introduce the concept of Robocop 2. And where Robocop 2 is where you're like, this is where we start to get to the unfilmable territory. Frank's original idea for Robocop 2 was this giant death machine with a human brain in it, with a giant TV screen on the front that would fight Robocop. And if you watch Robocop 2, that's essentially what Robocop 2 is, but it's not as insane as it is in the book. And we'll get to that in a minute. I know I'm rambling, but it's interesting history, so... I'm not going into all the gritty details, so... But basically, Frank's script was deemed unfilmable, and the producers said, alright, we're going to take this idea, we're going to pay you for it, and then we're going to touch it up a little bit, make it filmable. And that's where Robocop 2 came in. Just to give my basic thoughts on Robocop 2, it's a good movie, it's fun, and it's a decent successor to the original. It doesn't hold up as well as Robocop 1 does. I watched Robocop 1 last Friday, I think. Last Friday, a couple weeks ago. And it holds up. It really does hold up. I haven't rewatched Robocop 2 yet, but I saw it recently enough where comparing it to this book should be fair, maybe. But Robocop 2 is a decent movie. The biggest problem that Robocop 2 has when you go back and rewatch it is the remnants of Frank's script that were not cut out for the movie. I know that, and let me explain what that means, because that kind of gives a connotation to, oh, I hate the book. No, not at all. What I mean by that is where they do add in new ideas, stuff that wasn't in Frank's original script, it hinders the movie, but it's necessary to the plot that they eventually came up with. Case in point, you have Kane the drug dealer. Kane the drug dealer is not in Frank's original script at all, or in the book. It was an idea totally come up with for the movie, and I think the reason why was because they wanted to give Robocop 2 a villain, not only a villain with a face, but more of a typical 90s action movie villain. And of course, crazy drug dealers were all in. And in the book and in the movie, the real villain is not really Kane. I mean, Kane is definitely an important part of the plot. He ultimately is the one who becomes Robocop 2, but really the real villain of the book is Dr. Margaret Love, who is the woman who chooses Kane as the candidate to become Robocop 2, which is going to be designed to replace Alex Murphy. Because Alex Murphy is kind of, as Robocop, kind of gotten off the chain of OCP, and they want something they can control more or less. So they decide to go with Kane. That's cool and all, but the problem with Robocop 2 having all that stuff going on, while also trying to develop Alex Murphy as a character, and Robocop thus, while, trying to develop the story of OCP taking control of Detroit, it's just too fucking much. It really is too much for an audience member to consume and, have all these ideas be developed and interesting. Now, they're all interesting, but development is the key issue. Because each idea is given a decent amount of screen time, but it's always very awkward to jump to the next concept. To go from Alex Murphy, or Robocop rather, is remembering Alex Murphy's wife, and is stalking her more or less. We've got Kane doing all this drug stuff. We've got Robocop dealing with whether or not he is Alex Murphy. His wife confronts him. He has to lie to her that he's not actually Alex Murphy in order to stop her from having all this mental grief. And then you've got Robocop having his prime directives being rewritten to better fit OCP's idea for him as being a role model. It is a lot of crap, and it's all good ideas, but to put that in a 2-hour movie, to pack it all in there, is very difficult for an audience to consume and for the filmmakers to present in a developed and interesting way. And Robocop 2 ultimately kind of fails at it. Again, it's a fun movie. It's not terrible. It just does not economize its ideas or pace itself in a way, and that is really the big problem, is pacing, or pace itself in a way where all those ideas can be given the time they need to cook. The original script for Robocop 2, the book I'm holding in my hand, which we are finally going to get to, more or less fixes all those problems. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to agree with me. A lot of people don't like this book. Well, this book is very polarizing in that way. A lot of people don't like it, and a lot of people like it a lot better than Robocop 2. And, after posting the fact that I was going to review this on Facebook, I already got some messages from people who don't like the book at all and say that Robocop 2 is better and that they were better off not going with the original script. So now I've read the book, I have had time to let it sit with me, and what are my thoughts on it? Well, let's start off saying what's different from Robocop 2 so I don't just make this a compare and contrast exercise. Well, number one, a lot of the basic things are the same. The basic foundation is the same. Detroit is a shithole, just like the first movie, but this time it's even worse. It's almost like a hellhole now, or it is a hellhole rather. It's close enough to hell itself because all the cops are on strike because of the bullshit they've been given by OCP. They're being underpaid, they're under-respected, their authority is non-existent, and they're just being pushed around, and their ability to do their job properly has been compromised. So they're on strike. Cops going on strike, not a good thing. None of them are on duty. Well, there are a couple on duty, and one of them, of course, is Robocop, but there are so little on duty that it's ultimately pointless. Detroit is in a state of fucking anarchy. Everything is just falling apart. Crime has exploded. People are afraid to leave the house. Talk shows and news stations are alive with controversy over OCP, over the police strike, over people dying and the crime. It's just insane. It is a place you don't want to live in. And this script, and the first movie didn't have this so much because it didn't go as over the top in terms of the crime as this book did. And also as the Robocop movie did. But the book, to a certain extent, is like, this world is so fucked up, the crime is so bad, that it's almost funny. That's how fucked up it is. The nature of the crime is so intense, so heinous and horrendous that it's almost funny to read. Now, not funny in a way of like, oh, ho, 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 he just lost his arm. Funny in a way of like, oh my god, I am so glad I don't live in this world. That's what makes the book and the movie so goddamn entertaining. And again, the first movie's included in that too, but it wasn't as over the top as this is. And that's what makes the book so goddamn entertaining, is like, this is so horrendous. Not the quality, the state of the city, that there is no possible way I could live in a city that's this bad. Now, I know that, of course, overseas and in some parts of America, there is crime that is very, very bad, and I wouldn't want to live in those cities, and it is fucked up. But this is so far insanely beyond that it's entertaining, that you are able to separate yourself from this world, at least enough, because at the same time, you're also intrigued by the things that are close, scarily close to our world, such as the media, the talk shows, the news stuff. That's all in our real world. But the crime itself is what really makes this book so goddamn entertaining, because you're not depressed reading it. That's something that Robocop has always shocked me in and when it's good, how it does it. It could be such a depressing thing to read and to watch, because there's a lot of death, no one is happy, it's just depressing. But because the world is so alien, because the crime and the terrors that people are dealing with are so goddamn over the top, it's fun. And that's where this book really shines. That's where a good portion of Frank Miller's writing does succeed, and that's where he's really strong, is he knows how to turn a really depressing idea into something that's fun to read, while also giving you some stuff to think about. But immediately the thing that this book does right is it's an economized story. And now we're going to start to get into the things that are different from Robocop 2, and will bring me to the assertion that I think this book is kind of significantly better than Robocop 2. Then that's the big thing. It economizes its story. Robocop 2, just like this book, opens with a montage of the crime that's going on. And this book opens up the same way. It's, you know, it shows you the insane level of crime I just discussed, and it shows you Robocop's place in it. And it shows you how bad things have gotten, and how Robocop is dealing with it, and why ultimately Detroit has come to depend on Robocop. Because he's the 24-hour cop. He does need to rest, but he doesn't have to do it as a human would. He's still a machine, so he can operate without getting 6 hours of sleep every day. And they talk about that a lot in the book. How, he's going out there for 7 days straight fighting crime because no one else will. And that's where this book also pulled itself away from Robocop 2 for me, was its focus on Alex Murphy, its focus on Robocop. Robocop is the protagonist of this book. It's not Ann Lewis, it's not the mayor, it's not a kid, it's not Kane. No, it is Robocop. And he's not in every scene, but every scene directly or indirectly relates to him. The biggest problem Robocop 2 has, and Robocop 3 to an enormous degree, is Robocop has so little to do with half the stuff that's going on. And in this book, everything goes back to Alex Murphy. And that's another thing that made it really entertaining, and it made it more fun to read, was we got to follow Robocop more than we ever have before. To a certain extent, even more so than the first movie, though not by much. They cut out all the shit with Kane. Kane isn't in the book at all. And again, that allows the book to focus on Robocop, because we don't have to develop this other giant personality. Now, the plot is the same. OCP's desire to build a Robocop 2 is the same, but their methodology is completely different, and the person they ultimately pick to become Robocop 2 is ultimately a smarter choice, in my opinion, because of how it simplifies the plot, how it makes it better paced. The book is drastically more better paced than the movie for this reason, because it doesn't feel the need to go off into these other side streets of story that aren't necessary. It condenses itself down. It makes it a much more streamlined read, or watch rather, as opposed to the movie. And the biggest example of that is both Robocop 2 rather, and in how they get the person to become Robocop 2. Because there's no Kane, we get to focus on OCP. We get to focus on the shit that is Detroit. We don't have to focus on this complete other setup and situation of this drug called Nuke. We don't have to focus on Kane. We can just focus on what's important. Because again, in Robocop 2, at the end of the day, all that shit is pointless and it bogs down the movie. Frank Miller's take doesn't have that problem at all. Because in addition to how it simplifies Robocop 2 by cutting out Kane, it also manages to work in Robocop 2 to Alex Murphy's progression. Because while in the movie they do show that Robocop is dealing with this crap of Nuke before Kane becomes Robocop 2, it's still a problem because those two things have nothing to do with each other once Kane dies. The Nuke kind of becomes inconsequential. What they do here is everything that's going on with Robocop informs who becomes Kane, or who becomes Robocop 2 rather. The police strike informs that. Nuke being a big drug problem kind of just happens coincidentally at the same time of the police strike, so it becomes more difficult for people to deal with that problem. It's not necessary, because Detroit's going to be a shithole with or without Nuke, because it doesn't have cops. And Robocop and Frank Miller's book realizes that and uses that to its positive effect. The other thing that benefits a lot, and I keep forgetting to get to this point. I'm sorry. Who ultimately becomes Robocop 2 is this character called Kong. Fucking awesome, right? He's this mercenary who works for OCP because of this. I believe it's called the Rehab Military Force. They're basically the new cops for Detroit, who are comprised of rehabilitated criminals, or at least marketed as rehabilitated criminals. And one of them is this guy called Kong, who is just a fucking psychopath. He is just a cold-hearted murderer with no moral compass, with no humanity whatsoever. He's just a killing machine. And he doesn't get a lot of panel time. Now you would think, oh, he's underdeveloped. He doesn't have to be developed, because all he is a psychopath. Because he's not the actual villain. The real villain of this book, in the focal point, in a lot of the book, is Margaret Love, is the doctor who doesn't like Alex Murphy and doesn't like Robocop and wants to build a better Robocop. So when she gets this candidate, it doesn't fucking matter who it is. It can be the only requirement is that it has to be a psychopath, someone who has no moral compass, who will take orders unquestionably as long as he gets to kill people. And to put that brain inside of a Robocop body, dangerous. So there you go. That's all the explanation you need. You don't need this drug shit or this drug dealer. That's all you need. And again, it builds back into Alex Murphy's progression as a character and throughout the plot, so that way it doesn't feel like it's two separate incidents that just get forced together. That's how Robocop 2 feels. This book doesn't feel that way. So the other thing that benefits from that as well is a plot line that's relatively intact in the movie, though I like how the book handles it a little bit better, is two things that are kind of mixed together. One, you have Robocop becoming more cognitively aware of the fact that he is Alex Murphy, and that he's not just a machine with a couple of Alex Murphy's brain cells intact. No, he's actually Alex Murphy brought back from the dead. And how they do that here is he doesn't go around stalking his wife. What happens, I think, makes more sense, makes Robocop look better as a character, and is also a lot more tragic. What happens is OCP and Dr. Love are sick of Robocop going around butchering people. At least that's how he appears on TV, because he's going around fighting this insane crime. What else is he gonna do? He has to kill these people because the jails are overflowing. So what happens is Dr. Love says, after Robocop gets injured, I believe in the scene where he fights Kong, he gets injured to the point where he has to be repaired fully. So they bring him into the police station. They have all his arms and legs taken off, and he's just a torso with a head, with the mechanical bits on. He's sitting there, and Dr. Love is telling him how, I'm going to make your life so much easier. I am going to make you accept and love what you are, and what you are is you're my bitch. You are a cyborg who works for OCP. That means you're my bitch. So I'm going to erase all your prime directives and replace them with 1,800 new lines of code, which is going to make you a lot more presentable to the public. So they basically want to take out everything that's left of Alex Murphy and just make him basically a walking, talking PR for OCP. The idyllic super cop without the gun and well, he still has the gun, but without the violence. So while this is happening, Clara Murphy, I think is her name? Something. Every version of Robocop changes his wife's first name. I'm going to say Clara, though. So Clara Murphy, Alex Murphy's wife, comes barging into the operation room, screaming, "Alex! Alex!" But she's crying her eyes out because she's saying, "They told me you were dead." And the look on Robocop's face is just like, I never, ever wanted her to see me like this. Because he knew it would hurt her. And after her comes in this sleazeball lawyer, who all he brought her there to do is to get Robocop, Alex Murphy, to sign that their marriage, because of his supposed death, is now null and void. that she is legally allowed to get remarried because of Alex Murphy's quote-unquote death. That marriage is null and void. So Robocop, or Alex Murphy rather, obviously doesn't have any hands right now. So the lawyer, like a fucking dick, is just like, because of your compromised position, we'll deal with just a verbal agreement. And Clara Murphy and Alex just can't stop being like, it's you. Or Clara can't, because she's just like, they told me you were dead. I'm so sorry, honey. I'm so sorry. Like, she just can't stop apologizing to him because, again, she thought he was dead. And there he is sitting in front of her, just basically a head on a stick, just talking to her. And Robocop hears everything she says. And what's genius about doing this in a comic book is you have the ability to have people talking in the background without it interfering with the flow of dialogue. If you're doing this in a movie, you could do it, but it'd be difficult and kind of distract the audience. It's not distracting here really because it's done with speech balloons. So you've got Alex and Clara talking, and in the background you have the lawyer, or in the foreground rather, or the center background, he's visible. And then off panel we have two technicians talking, or basically working on Alex Murphy while he's talking, and just talking about how, like, all the mistakes they're making while they're fixing him. It's fucked up. It's very Frank Miller-ish. So Clara and Alex talking. So it's really fucked up because it's just like these two people's love are inconsequential to these people. They only care about the factual bottom line, as it were. The lawyer just wants him to get him to agree to this, and the technicians just want to fix him. No one gives a fuck about this emotional destruction that's going on in front of them. And the most tragic thing about it is Alex just says, I understand. That's all he needs to say. And he says he agrees, and he's just like, Clara, please go. It is heart-wrenching. It is a great, great scene. And the scene in the movie is fine. It's heart-touching as well, but it's not as powerful just because of the fact that Alex, she doesn't see him as Alex Murphy. She sees him as just a machine, because he says to her, and it's not her fault, it's his fault. He's just like, I'm just a machine. They gave me this face to honor his memory. That's sad too, but it's not sad for her. It's not as sad because it takes out some of the humanity. It's a lot sadder in the book because of the fact that she acknowledges, and he acknowledges that, yeah, I'm Alex Murphy, I'm back from the dead. And she is going to get remarried, and he has to agree that she is no longer his wife while his arms are off and he's getting erased, basically. It is insanely heartwarming. It's a great piece of writing. And then that also builds into the Prime Directives thing. Now, again, because of the lack of Kane and all this other shit going on, because that scene is the focal point, it is so much more heart-wrenching, rather. It's so much more emotional. It's so much more interesting to read, to focus on, because there's not all this other fucking shit going on. And it's able to breathe. You're able to breathe with the scene. It's just so much better paced, and it's a much easier read. It's a lot more of a fun read, and it's just overall a much better experience than the movie. What else did I like regarding that? I still kind of have the same problem with the book and the movie, with the whole changing his Prime Directives thing, only because it doesn't really... Okay, in the movie... Let me start with the book, actually. So in the book, they change his Prime Directives, and he goes off to be a PR guy for OCP, just to basically be a role model to kids. And the same thing in both versions kind of happened. He gets embarrassed, people just start attacking him. He's basically worthless now. And in both the book and the movie, he finds a way to overcome this. But in the movie, it's like a 5-minute scene. It's so quick. It's so inconsequential. It's just like, we should have just cut that out. It's really pointless to the rest of the movie. And I think the problem with that was because they have all this other shit going on with Kane. And it has nothing to do with all that, because it's just unrelated. Again, in the book, they're focusing a lot more on Alex Murphy. It's a lot more from his perspective. And Robocop 2 relates to this because they're trying to make him obsolete. And his inability to do his job makes him obsolete. So it's a better scene because it's a little bit more developed. What is a little bit shaky about it is, again, you gotta question its place. While it has more to do with what's going on in the book, it's still not perfect. Because what happens is, Alex and Robocop never really accept these prime directives. In the movie, Robocop acts like a good-hearted American cop with nothing else to do except inspire children and get people to be better people. That's how it's presented, and Peter Weller's acting in that scene is awesome. The book, he never really gets to that point. He wakes up, sees all the prime directives, and Dr. Love is immediately just like, oh, and by the way, if you fuck up at all, we left a couple of Alex Murphy's nerve endings intact. And she shocks him, and it's just like, you can still feel pain. Which is a dick move. Great scene. But what happened, but you know what? He never accepts that. He never, at no point while you read it do you think, and maybe this is just because of the art, maybe they misinterpreted the script. Robocop always has a wince on his face whenever he says something like very role model-ish and cheesy. He's always acting out as his old intense self, and never acts like that role model that they wanted to create. He always talks like it. Whenever he says something, it sounds like he's like, don't. One thing he says a lot is bad words make for bad feelings, and he's basically against cursing. So, it works in that way, but I think there was a kind of a gap in communication between the script and the artist in this point, because he never fully buys into that. So again, it's kind of pointless. It's like, why do we even have to take this route? What kind of makes it better in the book is that it stays with him for basically the rest of the goddamn book, and it ultimately serves to be a wider character development. Because him being that kind of role model, you know, non-violent, basically pussy, stays with him throughout almost every time he fights Robocop 2, so it's kind of like a handicap in that way. And it's kind of better for him being a proactive character because he has to actively go after Dr. Love and go after Robocop 2 in order to get this programming erased so he can go back to doing his job. So it's better in that way because it lasts longer, again, better pacing. But again, it's still like, did we really need to go this route? Again, it's a cool scene in both the movie and the book, but in both you got to question whether or not it's necessary, and again, whether or not it bogs down the story. Definitely in the movie, a little bit in the book, not as bad. It's much better handled in the book. But RoboCop 2 itself, and I'm talking about the actual robot. In the book, it's a lot. Again, you can see where they're like, Frank, we can't film this. It is an insane design. I'm going to flip to a page in my copy so I can just get a point of reference since I didn't just reread this. It's an intense-ass fucking design. It's got the face of an insect, the body of, like, the Hulk, and overall, it's just a crazy-ass design. And it's got a brain in there. And a TV screen attached to the face so you can see the person it once was. It's a crazy design. It looks awesome. But you can see why in the movie they had to cut it back a little bit and make it look how it ultimately looked. Where you can see Kane's face as a digital representation, but it's not there all the time like it is on RoboCop 2. Nowadays, you could film that. That would be definitely filmable with CGI. But back then, in the late 80s, early 90s, yeah, that's unfilmable. But I love the design. I love how just fucking insane it is. Again, it makes a lot of sense that OCP would think, okay, we have this insane level of crime, and we don't, and RoboCop is acting out against us. we better create something big and unstoppable that's just going to be a heartless killing machine that will always do what we tell it. And that's what it does. It always does what it tells them, because Kong is a heartless killer who just goes after whatever he's told, and what he's told to go after is Robocop. And in the book, and I believe in the movie this was the same as well, maybe not, they frame oh no, that was in the third one. Alright, so scratch that. In Robocop 2, the book, or Frank Miller's Robocop rather, they frame Robocop for a couple murders that actually Robocop 2 committed. So that way they have a public reason to go after Alex Murphy and to take him down. And there's some great action scenes. But he's a cool character. And it's a better version of Robocop 2 because of how simplified it is and because of how simple it needed to be. Like, we didn't need Kane. It's so goddamn complicated to get him to become Robocop 2, and you realize it could have been anybody. And this book was like, yeah, it could have been anybody, so let's just make it some random psychopath. Better. So, it's a great book, but there are a couple problems with it that kind of isolate itself from Robocop 2, the movie. So let's get into stuff I like about the book and don't like about the book, separating it from Robocop 2. Well, number one, I'll talk about, since I've been talking about positives, I'll keep going with positives. Another thing I really liked about it, separate from the movie, the art is gorgeous. I always thought that Frank Miller did the art for this as well as the writing. That's not true at all. In fact, he didn't even technically write the book. He wrote the script, and then Stephen Grant came in and adapted it for a comic book layout. So, the art is done by Juan Jose Rip. That's an intense-ass name. Someone I've never heard of. However, the cover for the book that you see when you pick it up is a Frank Miller rendition of Robocop, and it's pretty badass. It's pretty fucking cool looking. But Juan Jose Rip's art, it is awesome. I really enjoy it because it's kind of like a sleeker version of Frank Miller's art. I'm not a big fan of Frank Miller art. The early stuff that you saw in the first two issues of The Dark Knight Returns looked really good. Once you get to 3 and 4, it doesn't look so great. It looks a little mucky. When you look at his covers for these issues of RoboCop, they're really, really lazy. The ones that Jose Rip did are really much, much better. Frank Miller's, I think, are really lazy. They're just like these abstract images of just like RoboCop with a skull for a face. There's one where it's just a woman like hugging RoboCop. There's one, she's not even in the book. There's one where it's just like RoboCop. It's weird. It's not very good art by Frank Miller in this case. But as for Juan Jose Rips, it's gorgeous. It's kind of him. It's kind of like him channeling Frank Miller, but making it more sleek and a little bit more digestible for someone who doesn't like Frank Miller. So I really, really enjoy the art. It fits the RoboCop world very, very nicely. Everything looks like it's supposed to look. RoboCop 2 looks badass. RoboCop himself looks great. There are some just great panels. It's just a great layout of a book. It looks really, really good. What else do I want to touch on that's separate from the movie in terms of positives? Oh, okay. So one last thing about the art and more about the panel layout. Here's the thing. This is not a straight up comic book. Obviously, it's obviously a script turned into a comic book. So there are some light problems and positives that can have. One thing being said, it's paced like a movie. If you like movie pacing, you're gonna dig this pacing. In terms of how the transitions of the panels, where scenes cut, you can very much so work out in your head, okay, here's how you would do that on the big screen. There are a lot of cutaways that you would see in a film that are nice. The way scenes are cut, again, it kind of feels like a movie on the page. And that's, you can definitely tell it started off as a movie screenplay. And I like, as a film guy, I like that a lot. I mean, I enjoy comic book pacing too when it's separate from movies, but as a more of a movie guy, I always like comics that are paced more like movies. And this is one of those. Negatives with the panels in terms of relating into a screenplay. By the same token of how it benefits from it, it more is negatively impacted by it. And here's what I mean. Action in comic books is differently laid out than movies. Obviously, with a movie, you have the ability to show the full motion of what's going to happen. With a comic book, you have to show the big moments. You have to show the big things that are important to understanding what's going on. There's an art to it in and of itself. You have to find a good balance between showing what needs to be shown and not showing what doesn't need to be shown. The book walks a very fine line between that, and in a couple of places it steps over the line. One of which happens about 3 times, is because the action is so complex, they actually feel the need to draw little arrows to direct you to the panels that go in the correct sequence. It is bizarre. I don't think it's necessary. I think that if they felt the need to go there, I think they should have been like, well, we need to lay out these panels better, so that way we don't need these arrows, because it's very distracting to be like, here's where your eye should go. It almost feels like you're reading like one of those old kids coloring books where it's like, go here to color in this. So it's a little bit funky in that way. It's a little bit distracting. I'm not crazy about it. I think that they should have found a way to do those action scenes as better adaptations into a comic book medium. I think it's a little bit poorly done in that way. Yeah, those arrows I'm not a fan of the arrows. But in terms of other stuff that I wasn't crazy about, the arrows distracted me big time. I thought it was kind of like, then we should have adapted this better into a comic book, shouldn't we? What else didn't I like? There was something else I wanted to bring up. Oh, Frank. Just those moments when you're reading where you're just like, oh, Frank. Frank Miller's style has become an infamous thing to make fun of now amongst the comic book community just because of how fucking crazy he is. And it comes out in this book, believe you me. One of the big things is how Frank views women. Alright, Frank is not really a misogynist or a sexist, or at least in my eyes, he has a very particular way of viewing women, though. And boy, does that come out in this book. Okay, every woman is fully sexualized. Fully. Even if they weren't in the first movie. Well, maybe not Clara Murphy. His wife is only in like two pages, though, so that's not saying much. Every other woman, fully sexualized. One that wasn't, that shocked me to see her here, is Anne Lewis, Robocop's partner. She is like the most asexual tomboy in the first Robocop movie. And in this, there are panels and pages where she is just fully exposed. I mean, you don't see tits or what's going on underneath, but goddamn do you see everything else. You see panties, you see full-on legs, you see full-on torso, navel, all that shit. I mean, they draw her as an attractive woman, but it's pointless and it's kind of distracting. It's so over the top that it distracts you from the story, where you're just like, how would that explosion burn off those sections of clothes without like giving her drastic injuries and third-degree burns? There's this, she loses pants, coats get ripped open. It's just weird. And you're just like, Frank. And you know, based on, if you've ever heard about the script for All-Star Batman and Robin, you know he wrote that in there. You cannot blame Juan Jose Rep. Don't blame my boy Juan Jose. It's not his fault. Yeah, it's a very sexual interpretation of every female character. Dr. Margaret Love is fully sexualized. She's constantly in all these skimpy outfits. She's constantly like strutting her way around RoboCop and shit. The dude doesn't have a dick, so you don't fucking be a non-dickless cock tease. So yeah, it's unusual. It's not terrible. It doesn't ruin the book, but it's just like, Frank, come on, is this really necessary? Shouldn't we be worrying about like RoboCop's dying or some shit? It's just weird. I wasn't crazy about that aspect of it. What does work for it in terms of being a Frank Miller book and being a Frank Miller-ism, the darkness and the over-the-top nature of the violence and the satire is right at home in a Robocop book or a movie. So that was right at home, no problems there. That's what Robocop is gore, satire, and being over the top. So I was totally fine with that. And why I'm a little bit pissed that the remake is going to be rated PG-13. What the fuck, Sony? So yeah, I really, and we're about 45 minutes in, so I'm gonna fucking end this. I don't really have anything else to say. I really, really, really like this book. I really enjoyed it. It's one of my favorite comics I've read in recent memory. It's really, really good. I definitely enjoy it more than Robocop 2 just because it's so much better paced. It's so much more economized. And it's one of the few things that benefits from having a slower pace and cutting out a lot of stuff. It's, you know, well, it doesn't cut out a lot of stuff. It economizes it. Everything that makes Robocop 2 great, you know, with depending on whether or not you like Kane, is in there. But it's economized to the point where it's more condensed and able to better tell its story. So I really enjoyed this. The art's great. The writing is good. Is before Frank Miller went nuts, so that's good. It's a great, great romp in the Robocop universe. I really hope Frank Miller gets to have his Robocop 3 script given the same treatment, since he also wrote a treatment for Robocop 3. So I want to see that get the same treatment. To see Frank Miller, or I don't know what you'd call it, because to call it Frank Miller's Robocop 2 would be like, wait, wasn't that the last book? So that would be unusual, but I hope that it gets the same treatment, because Robocop 3, it's a piece of shit. So, I hope that that script is as good as this is, if not better, maybe. And that we get to see a better version of that movie done as well. Do I recommend this? Totally. If you're a Robocop fan, go check it out. It definitely, I don't know if it replaces Robocop 2, but it's like, if you don't like Robocop 2, you'll probably like this. Or at least like it better. So if you're a Robocop fan, go check it out. It doesn't really hold up well on its own, though. If you're someone who doesn't like the first movie and doesn't know the franchise, this is not going to work for you. This is really just for Robocop fans. It doesn't tell its own story. Well, I mean, it tells its own story, but it doesn't tell its own story separately from the first movie. And separate from the universe. So you kind of have to know the universe in order to get into this. So I do recommend, for those of you who haven't seen it in a while, if you want to read this, go rewatch Robocop 1. And for those of you who are being initiated into the universe, just go watch the first movie. That's really your best starting place. And then once you've read that, maybe watch Robocop 2 and then read this. Because if you read this and then watch Robocop 2, it's not going to hold up well. So you kind of have to have a preconceived knowledge of Robocop 2. But again, go check it out. It's a good book. Fucking expensive, though. So, of all the things I just said, make a good determination and make sure your $20 are well spent. But it's a lot of reading. It's a thick book. So, if, you know, $20 isn't terrible. I've bought smaller books for $20 by Marvel and DC. Haha, Marvel and DC, cut it out. So, it's worth buying. Go check it out. And that's about all I have to say. I'm not quite sure what my next review is going to be on. This was kind of in the pipe, in the pipe for the running, so this review has been planned out for about a week now, so I'm kind of in the dark on my next review. So if there's anything out there that I haven't touched on that you guys are intrigued to see, go ahead, drop me a line. I'll see if I'm up for it. So, you know, drop a couple movie suggestions, comic suggestions, mainly movies. I kind of want to go back to my monster movie roots on my next review. I haven't done a monster movie in a while. So, if there's something I haven't reviewed in the past that you guys like, I want to hear your thoughts on this, go ahead and drop it in the comments. I'll take a look and see if I'm up to do it. But that's Frank Miller's Robocop, and that's it for this video. So thank you very much for watching, /listening, /whatever the fuck you're doing. As long as you're intaking this in some way, if you're doing it through touch feel, I don't know how the fuck that works, but good on you. Keep on trucking. Anyway, so I'm Zazubaar, and I'll see you all later. Farewell.